Pacers Celtics game 3 tonight. What has to be better for the Pacers among many things? Tyrese Haliburton's injury latest. What does it mean? How the Pacers can balance their lineups a little better? Some matchup data. We're getting into the weeds on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Saturday. Hope you're having a great weekend, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, hope everybody's enjoying race weekend. We've got to talk about Game 3, the biggest game of the Pacers season to date, trumping Game 3 of last round and Game 7 of last round. As big as it gets for the Pacers, down 2-0. No one's ever come back from 3-0. Lots of teams have come back from 3-1. Not a lot, but enough. They got to win this one. It's as big as it gets, and they've had some epic Game 3s in the postseason so far. They'll need another one tonight. We're going to break down a lot about the game, stuff that I think should change, the latest on Haliburton's injury, some matchup stuff, some lineup stuff, the weeds of this series. You know it's coming, as we do here on Locked On Pacers, and we have to start with the biggest news, which is Tyrese Haliburton. But I might remind you that tonight the stakes are high because Pacers last home loss March 18th, 2 months and a week ago from today. The Celtics in the playoffs, undefeated on the road. What's going to give? That's going to define the series. If the Pacers lose at home, they're in a lot of trouble. They're already in a lot of trouble. If the Celtics can keep their things up on the road, if the Pacers can clean up at home, go back to Boston and they'll feel a lot better. Big news for the Pacers from Friday. Tyrese Haliburton on the injury report, as expected on the injury report, the official designation, left hamstring soreness, and he is questionable. That is about the best case scenario, I think, for the Pacers, that he is not listed as out. I think with something like this, they'll know more even tomorrow. And Rick Carlisle kind of alluded to that after Game 2. But how he feels tomorrow, how he responds to whatever he's able to do Friday, how he responds to his pregame warmup will be telling. You've already seen how muscle injuries can be problematic to return from for Haliburton already. And it's, you know, if it's just sore, it's different than a strain or anything like that, but it's tricky, right? But the season's on the line, and that does change the calculus of returns and what it means. And of course, the long term is the most important part here. So we'll see. But questionable is as good of news as could have been expected to me from the Pacers. I think there was a 100% chance he's going to be on the injury report in some capacity. So we won't know until the day of the game, obviously, which is today. We won't know until closer to the game's start time if he's able to go or not and what that means for the rest of the series. But good start, I would say. And I opined yesterday about who would start in Haliburton's place if he's unable to go. And I said, I think McConnell is the most natural answer. That did happen at times this season when Haliburton was out with his previous hamstring injury in, late January, early February. TJ McConnell started 4 games in total this season, and all of them were in that span. And it came after the Pacers kind of realized, our offense is really stuck in the mud right now. We need ball handling on the floor, and they got him in there to start the games. He started in Sacramento. Pacers won that game, if you remember. He started in Phoenix. He started against Sacramento in that weird game where Haliburton wasn't playing in the first quarter. Those were his starts this season. And he had 20 and 10 that first start when they won. He was 7 for 11 at his second start. It works, but that was a different Pacers team back then. They still had Buddy Hield. It was just not the same reality they're in now. And we've heard Rick Carlisle, and I think rightly say before, he likes to keep his bench unit together. I talked about this stuff yesterday, but even pulling stuff out from that bench unit, what makes that unit so good and has made it good all year is that specifically Toppin, McConnell, Shepard, Jackson, and Mathurin, he was in there, fit really well together. That's a good lineup. So yes, they're all good players and that their depth has been a success, but their depth is extra successful because those players pair so well. McConnell, Toppin come in at the same time a lot for that reason. If you take that away, are you losing a superpower of the team? And if so, how do you get around that? Do you start Ben Shepard, for example, and have Nembhard be the one, and then have your first subs be to bring in McConnell, Toppin with Shepard, and then but you could do that if McConnell started too, but It's just tricky to imagine what it could look like, and especially tricky to imagine how it could look if they don't add another player into the mix, right? If they just go 8 deep and run with the units they've been going with. So here it's tricky. And if Haliburton plays, obviously this isn't as important, but if he's limited in any way, they'll have to think about their rotation a little differently. So lots to consider for the Pacers with this. I still think my answer would be start McConnell, but I think there's good arguments for lots of stuff because Nembhard can move down a position. And I don't think they should add another player to the mix. We've seen that throughout the postseason. We saw that in the whatever the heck that fourth quarter was of game 2, that there's not a lot of other good options for this series. And I think that might the best thing to do could be, unless they want to go huge and start topping and then do what I said earlier, where they just bring the bench guys in earlier and try to have that, but then you're running whoever you start into the ground. Here's what's key to me digging through the postseason numbers for the Pacers. Let's start with just Haliburton, Siakam, right? When they're both on the floor, Pacers offensive rating is sensational. When just Siakam's on the floor, the Pacers offensive rating is very good. When just Haliburton's on the floor, no Siakam, their offensive rating is pretty good. And when they're both off, which shouldn't happen in the playoffs, and it's only happened for 64 minutes in the postseason through 15 games. We're talking like 4 minutes a game on average, and that's skewed by some garbage time moments. But there's been a few times it's happened. Either way, the Pacers offensive rating is 109.5. That's awful. That's terrible. And so without Haliburton, there's going to be minutes that happens. They've got to maximize those. If they have a stretch where their offense is that bad against the Celtics, they just lose the game. So they have to find a way to, one, if Haliburton doesn't play, make Siakam's minutes sensational. And two, when Siakam's off the floor, they have to be good enough. And they haven't been throughout the playoffs. And the reason I start with that layer is if you add in the third player who matters a lot in this, which to me is TJ McConnell, because he's a very good ball handler. These are the table setters that get your offense in motions, the identity setters of the units they play with. We've seen McConnell plus other star. McConnell Haliburton's a decent enough offensive rating. McConnell Siakam's 122.7 in the playoffs. All three in the brief moments of McConnell, Haliburton, Siakam, insanely good offensive rating. Right, like they've all been good. In the moments where Siakam is playing without McConnell and Haliburton, only 5 minutes, so a very small sample. The Pacers' offensive rating sucks. It's below 90. But also the minutes the Pacers have played without any of those three, 27 minutes in total in the playoffs. So we're not talking about a big sample at all, but still, their offensive rating is also below 90. So the key thing to get out of that exercise is if Haliburton can't play, or if he's limited in some way in terms of what his max minutes look like where he can be as effective as possible, McConnell and Siakam, one of them has to be on the floor at all times. If McConnell needs a rest, Nembhard, Siakam, both have to be in there. So you have a point guard and Siakam. And the inverse also has to be true. When McConnell's in, when Siakam's out, McConnell has to be in, and they need to overlap as much as possible if Haliburton can't play to keep the Pacers offense at an actually credible enough level to keep up with Boston, because in the alternative minutes, and I think that those numbers are so low that they would naturally go up somewhat. I mean, below 90 is absurdly bad, but we've seen the results not be good, and we've seen them go with all three of those guys out for random stretches that didn't make sense, but that can't happen. And if Haliburton's, again, I don't know, he might be able to play his full minutes load and look totally fine. And then it's about the normal rotation and balancing that. But if he's limited in any way, or he can't do the same things, those are the key things to watch for in game 3. Let's talk about some other adjustments, going through some stuff that happened in game 2, and then looking at some matchup data. Before we do that, though, got to very quickly talk to you guys about Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. All you do is pick more than or less than on 2 or more player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Biggest moments in the NBA rolling right now as the playoffs go for the NBA and the NHL as well. You can get in on the playoff action up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks as the world's best players take the game to a new level, and you can up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey entries today on Prize Picks. How do you play? It's very simple. You can do it in a minute or less. They have quick withdrawals and easy gameplay, and testing your skills is all about picking a player and more or less on a stat type. For example, Caitlin Clark, Fever, first win of the season tonight, more than or less than 20 points in a specific game. Or anyone still alive in the playoffs, Jason Tatum, more than or less than 22 points. Something like that is how you play 2 to 6 players and try to get it done. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100 on PrizePicks. Again, download the PrizePicks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100 on PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that simple. Back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Women's Basketball. Fever won their first game Friday night. That's why I'm recording this so late, because I got home and immediately flipped that on to watch it. Caitlin Clark, 2-dagger, FU threes late. Locked On Women's Basketball covers the whole world of women's basketball, including Caitlin Clark. Check it out. Today, I am sometimes on there as a part of the staff of the crew that runs that show. Let's talk some Pacers here as we continue on looking at this series. Talked about adjustments after game one with Dave Searle. We saw a lot of those come to fruition, but not all of them. We didn't see the Pacers go big as much, and of course, the way they closed the game and Haliburton's injury really jammed up their rotation and made things tricky. But let's talk about some stuff that I'm highlighting from game two. To start the game, they stuck with what they did in the first game, which was Nesmith on Jason Tatum and Pascal Siakam on Jaylen Brown. Brown was crazy good, and Tatum was not as good. Clearly some more success with those matchups than they had in game one when I suggested flipping them. However, to start the second half, Nesmith was on Derek White, and Nembhard was on Jaylen Brown, and Siakam was on Tatum. And that was only for like a possession or two. And maybe they were just trying to confuse them, and they changed it up and stuff, got back to normal. But they've got to iron that stuff out. And it's hard to defend these guys. Jason Tatum in this game was, I am blind. I have it right in front of me. It was 1 for 2 defended by Siakam. And where is Nesmith? There he is. 1 for 4 defended by Nesmith. So that did go much better in this game than it did in game one. And then Jaylen Brown, who was just cooking everybody, was 6 for 7 being guarded by Pascal Siakam in this game, and 1 for 4 being guarded by Nesmith. Nesmith can't guard both. So maybe what the Pacers are doing is actually fine, but mixing it up seems to be somewhat successful. Figuring out those matchups to the best of their abilities is important. It's hard to guard everybody on the Celtics, of course, and I suggested flipping it. I don't think they should do that as much anymore. I think they need to stick with what they have been doing and just hope that they can do a better job in particular. Derek White only got hot when he was guarded by Haliburton, which, to be clear, he still drilled the threes. But they found more success on Drew Holiday, for example, in the last game. They just have to find a way to iron out those wing guys. And I think mixing it up like they did to start the second half could be the way to do that. But Nesmith was more successful in a way that means my first adjustment, I will now say, was wrong, and they shouldn't do it. And they didn't do it. So smart on the Pacers there. Horford was on Siakam in this game. Some people were tweeting that was new. I think they did that in the second half and overtime a lot of game one of the series. Either way, it was for a full game new-ish. And that didn't work very well. Al Horford guarded Siakam. Siakam took 8 shots in those minutes, and he made 5 of them. He was great. The Pacers scored 37 points on 27.7, so really 28 possessions in those instances. That's tough. Siakam also cooked Jaylen Brown. He was 4 for 4 against him and 3 for 3 against Tatum. So maybe he's just impossible to match up with, but the Horford thing isn't working particularly well. If that starts as a thing again, Siakam needs to just go at it and go crazy again. I suspect it might not be the case, but the real key to that is Myles Turner. This is similar to the Bucks series and then how the front court cross matching dictates what big can go well. Myles Turner, 1 for 2 guarded by O'Shea Brissett, 1 for 1 on Peyton Pritchard, 0 for 2 on Tatum, and 1 for 2 on Derek White. That's all his shots from game 3. If this is the matchups again, and he is not guarded by Horford hardly at all, 46 seconds according to the NBA's matchup data, he has got to punish smalls. He's got to put Tatum in positions under the rim in some, without gooking up spacing if possible. If he's getting in the way, that's obviously a problem. But O'Shea Brissett, he should be able to post him up and get good shots there. Turner is really the key to that. Obviously, Siakam absolutely crushing Al Horford is valuable, and if they can keep going to that, they should. But I think a key part of that more specifically is what does it mean for Turner, who had a great first half of game one and has not been so awesome since. I think he can be better than certainly he was in game two. And I think if they do similar matchups, the Pacers have to look Turner's way more and find a way to get him involved specifically inside the arc, because that did not work particularly well. All right. This was the thing that I meant to bring up in the first segment when talking about Haliburton being out. That hasn't been the case. Siakam's got to get the ball, which sounds crazy to say because he was unbelievable in the last game and took 17 shots in his minutes out there. which is a lot. And he should get it that much. Here's the thing. He was cooking in the second and third quarter, which is why he had it. Many of you remember this from the first half. Let's put some specifics on it. Siakam scored the Pacers' first 4 points. The second one of those shots went in with 11:02 to go in the first quarter. Game progresses, and then at 6:57 to go in the first quarter, he comes out. That always happens. He comes out for Toppin, and then he comes back in later with the second unit. Nothing abnormal so far. He comes back in late in the first of that bench group, doesn't get it. He didn't get it for the late part of the early part of the first. And in total, he didn't shoot again until 11:28 to go in the second quarter. So he almost went an entire quarter of time without shooting the ball. Get Siakam the ball. I ran through the matchup data. He is a really unique mismatch in this series with size, skill, speed, everything he does so well. You've been watching him. You know how good he's played. And maybe he's been a little unsustainably hot, but if they don't have a good answer for him, he's got to get it. He's got to be involved, especially if Haliburton's not playing. And yeah, he'll get more attention in that way, but he's got to be great, and he knows it. So to me, that cannot happen again. They have to get him the ball. They have to look his way and make him valuable, because that's too few touches in this game. I still maintain some stuff from game one, by the way. Those are all my notes about stuff that I think the Pacers really specifically need to change in this game. There are some other things that I think were noteworthy. They're not really adjustment proof and just stuff Pacers need to do better. But Pacers were willing to switch a lot. That was something we talked about from game one. Their defense needs to just be better. They did not go to sticks until garbage time like they did in game one. They did not switch up the bench matchups with Isaiah Jackson, which was fine, actually. And the thing that I suggested the strongest that they didn't do, and I would like to see them try this at some point again in this series, is the Toppin Turner Siakam front court. It's skill and size against the Celtics defense, and they need to find ways to score. They scored 110 despite not having their full breadth of power for the last 15 minutes of the game for reasons that they tried to explain. And I think that they need to try that bigger group again. I know it's going to give them some defensive struggles, especially depending on who's actually out there for Boston if they're going with a smaller group, and they might have to. Luke Cornett looks like he's not going to play in game 3, but that just gives them some size combos that make sense in this series to me. And Siakam has found success guarding Tatum, like we already ran through, and maybe their best option on Brown as well. So I would try to go to that as the Pacers in game 3, at least more than they have throughout the series so far. A couple other stuff to get to involving this game. Let's hop right into that. Back here once again on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen on this lovely weekend. Check out Locked On Celtics. John Corrales will have the latest from the other side. Jaylen Brown going bananas in game 2 with 40 points. How he's looking, why he's doing it, all that stuff. Defensive matchups, going to be tricky. Having the right combos on the floor, going to be tricky if Haliburton's limited in any way. And the Celtics present a lot of their own challenges. Something that I think has been interesting is the Pacers bench has been so wonderful offensively. Their defensive level in game 2 was awful, right? That's why their plus minuses were so bad. Like Toppin was 4 for 6. McConnell had some nice passes, although it wasn't a great game for him. Shepherd was 50% from the field. Jackson was fine in this game, and yet all of them, or at least all of them but Toppin, have a plus minus below minus 10. And that is because they were terrible defensively in game 2. Like Toppin was in there, and this was in the first quarter, and this was in the stretch when he came in for Siakam. The Celtics were just going Peyton Pritchard, Jason Tatum, pick and pop with Haliburton and Toppin as the defenders, bucket every time, or a good shot every time. And those are two of the Pacers' worst defenders. They have to find a way to cover for that better, or just do a better job executing that defensive coverage, because Tatum didn't have a great game, but he can't get wide open shots like that. And Pritchard's been making his threes this series. Like, you got to guard him. He's a good shooter. He always has been, but now he's like very threatening from deep. They have got to be better defending that matchup, because they're going to have to play the rotation they have been to get enough offensive firepower out there. You've all been hearing me say it this whole series. Most adjustments the Pacers have to consider are cannot sacrifice offense. It's too hard to keep up with this team. Again, the Celtics had the best offensive rating ever this season. Pacers had the second best, of course, but the Celtics can just score on the Pacers defense all the time. The Pacers have to keep up. If they're sacrificing offense, the adjustment's not worth it. So they have to play their rotation in a way that gets in the best offensive firepower they can. And that means those guys, Haliburton and Toppin, have to defend better in those two main actions. If they can't, the Pacers are going to have a lot of trouble winning, and they had a lot of trouble winning in game 2. And that action, just very simple stuff, but they got a lot of really easy shots out of it. The other thing that happened in game 2 that I don't think could happen again for the Pacers, they and I will say first, hand up, I don't know. This was dealing something with his chest. He had to get his hamstring looked at halftime. I understand all that. They went with no Haliburton, no Siakam, no McConnell again. They can't do that. I mean, they can't even go no Haliburton plus Siakam at all. And that was when Haliburton was still at least playing in the game. They just can't do it. And I know I talked about that in the first segment, but that was a note that I wanted to get to from the game that surprised me. They just can't. If they're both playing, one of them has to be out there at all times for the Pacers because it just has to be. So adjustment-wise, the Pacers are it's tough to push buttons in this series to me. The Celtics have so much skilled size, right? Even their guards are larger. Everybody can shoot. They get up a bunch of threes. There's a reason their net rating was so crazy good. There's a reason they're now 10-2 in the postseason because they're an incredible team, right? I haven't said this yet, but I've thought this and said it to a couple people like in media spaces. Like the talent gap is so. I don't think people realize how big of a difference this is from the first two series, right? Pacers Bucks won the Bucks, like ignoring injuries even. The Pacers and Bucks were 2 wins apart in the regular season. The Pacers and Knicks were 3 wins apart in the regular season. The Pacers and Celtics were 17 wins apart in the regular season. The talent gap is so big that the execution has to be sublime for the Pacers. They did a terrific job in game 1 of running their offense, of playing at their pace most of the time, getting good looks and executing them, and being just disruptive enough defensively to keep up and survive Celtics' crazy stretches. And they had a great chance to win that game. And they didn't, but they had a chance. In game 2, they had fewer stretches of successful defense. Their offensive potency wasn't as high. It was fine, but it wasn't as high. Their execution wasn't as good. And they had a key injury, obviously. Like they have to be so precise and perfect in this series. And turnovers were the reason they weren't that in game 1. And in game 2, they just did not execute simple defensive stuff some of the times. They were not able to be disruptive enough on Jaylen Brown. They've got to be locked in the whole time. They've got to be at the right level of focus and calmness in some cases where they're going too hard, and just got to execute a lot of stuff better, figure out the rotation correctly, and really hope Haliburton is able to go. They were winning. Again, Haliburton played 28 minutes, and he came out with 3:44 to go in the third quarter of game 2, which is 9 minutes into that quarter. Of the first 33 minutes of that game, that means he played 28 minutes of them, and he was +1. And they were losing by about 10-ish when he came out. I can check that right now. Like, even when he only has 10 and 8 in that amount of time, he is massively impactful in this series. Just stunning how important he is. They were down 11 when he came out. So -12 without him, +1 with him. If he's able to go, the Pacers have a chance. He is that good. What are they guaranteed to win? Is it over a good chance? I don't know, but they have a chance if he's able to go. If not, even if he does play, they have to be so precise and so perfect. And these little errors they've had in the first 2 games are just killing them. We'll see what they can do. Adjustments will be key. Focus will be key. Having the right guys on the floor at all times will be key. And we'll be there for it in Gamebridge tomorrow night. And then after the game, it's a late one. Derek Kramer and I will do our once-a-series post-game breakdown. If the Pacers win, we'll probably be talking about stuff they did well and stuff they need to continue to do going forward. If they lose, we'll be talking about what it could take to be the first team to come back from 3-0 or getting ahead of ourselves potentially about this series. And then, of course, Rhett Bauer will be on at some point this series. I'd like to do something else with John Corrales or another Celtics person. So lots of fun stuff coming here. And if you are a race fan and you're listening from Indiana, hope you enjoyed Carb Day. I hope you enjoy the race. I hope that the weather is fantastic and it's a very fun sportsy week for Indiana. And I hope you can enjoy all of it. I already have, and the race hasn't even gotten here yet. Should be awesome. Pacers and Racers are back. Everybody have a very fun weekend. I'll see you after game 3 with the Pacers and Celtics.